Does Terry have a large white SUV too? Have you heard from Terry? So one just drove by, and he usually goes to the back. And he's never early, is he? Okay, it's 1 o'clock.
Just get a text from him saying traffic control on the highway has him about 7 minutes late.
Okay, so we'll thank you. Okay, yeah. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Rebecca, can you take roll?
Director Davidson?
Here.
Director Thomas?
I am here.
Director Underhill?
Here.
President Ramos?
Here.
And Director Strange is absent.
And we just heard he's in traffic, caught in traffic. He's about 6-7 minutes away, so he will be joining us shortly. Okay, welcome everybody to the rate hearing meeting, or regular board meeting of Wednesday, May 23rd, 2018. Next item on our agenda is public comment. And just this public comment session right here is for non-agendized items. It's for items that are not on our agenda. So at this time, members of the public may address the board on any non-agendized items. We only have one item on our agenda today, and it's the rate hearing on water and wastewater. So the public is encouraged to work through staff to place items on the agenda for board consideration. No action can be taken on matters not listed on the agenda. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. I know a lot of people have comments about the rate hearing and the water and wastewater rates. Is there anyone who has public comment on something that's not on the agenda today?
Mr. Chairman, where is the agenda?
The,
Sit up here.
there's a table right outside the door that will have a list of questions and answers. And then there's a stack of agendas out there also, Gary. Okay, so seeing no public.
For who, you?
No public comment at this time. We're going to move into to the public hearing. I want to thank everyone for coming today. And before I open up the public hearing, we're going to provide an overview of how the hearing will be conducted today. As we proceed through the hearing, I expect everyone to conduct themselves in a respectful and professional manner. I'm talking about the board, staff, as well as all public members who have arrived here today. We're not going to be answering questions during the public comment session. This is more of a listening hearing session. We want to hear what everyone has to say. So as you do come up, we're asking that everyone's comments is going to be limited to 3 minutes per person, and there is no gifting or trading of minutes to somebody else. So everybody in the room has your own 3 minutes, we've asked all the members of the public who wish to make a comment today to sign up on the sign-up sheet that's in the lobby, and we will be taking your public comments as they're listed on the agenda. So we'll be calling your names and asking you to come to the podium. We'll be listening to your comments and go from there. There is a frequently asked questions handout that's in the lobby as well, and I encourage you to pick up a copy of that either during the presentation or now if you'd like. After public comment is concluded, we're going to close the public hearing, and then the board itself will have its meeting, and that's what this board is here for. The board meeting, and prior to the board meeting, we're going to have the public comment. We are going to have presentation by staff, by Jeff Myers is going to be making a presentation. Also, our consultant from HDR, it's a financial consultant that we've retained, has been working with us on a cost of study or a cost of service study for about the last 6 or 8 months. We've been meeting with him and putting his reports together and finalizing, or he's finalized his report and presentation. He will, Sean Korn from HDR will also do a short presentation when Mr. Myers is completed, and then Jeff will have some closing remarks, and then Dave Egerton, our general manager, will also do a short presentation and provide his comments before the public hearing portion of the meeting starts. And then again, after the public comments, the board will close public comments, we'll close the hearing, and then the board will have our meeting and meet here in public amongst ourselves. So with that said, we're going to go ahead, Jeff Myers, go ahead and start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. The item before you today is the proposed water and wastewater rate adjustments. Staff is recommending your board adopt ordinance 2018-01, approving the district's proposed water and wastewater rate plan. In your board packet, it's quite thick. It includes the staff report, the ordinance, the attachments, the draft final sewer and water rate plans produced by HDR. I'm sure you've all read them cover to cover and have multiple questions for us. All joking aside, this is something we've been talking about for the last year. We started in April 2017. In front of your board, in front of the Finance Committee, everything you hear today is what we've already discussed. However, amongst all this literature and attachments, I do want to just read one section, and that's the beginning of the summary. And this is real critical in how we go about setting rates and what we need to do as a special district. Let me begin. As a special district governed by the laws of the state of California, the Calaveras County Water District must recover funds necessary to support its operations and infrastructure. Per policy, the district must review its water and wastewater rates for adequacy and propose adjustments if required. Since April of 2017, the district has held 15 publicly noticed Finance Committee and board meetings to address the funding requirements for the district water and wastewater services. We have also retained the services of HDR Engineering as a rate consultant they have extensive experience in performing these studies. Sean Korn, and prior to that, one of the individuals at HDR helped work on this was Tom Gould. Between the two of them, they have decades of experience in this and basically help write the manual for AWWA in rate models and rate setting. Before we go into Sean's presentation of what the cost of service study did, the different components of it, and how we got to the rate design, which is before your board, I'd like to propose or show you or present to you a little bit of a history of the district in finances. And this goes back when both Director Underhill and Director Davidson were on the board, starting in the early 2000s. Just to kind of give everybody a perspective of where we were and how we got to where we are today. And just as a footnote, I started in February of 2008, so I've got about 10 years of experience with the district. I want to go over some historical water and sewer rates, take a look at what happened when the Great Recession hit and how it affected the district and how we responded, take a look at the state-mandated water use reductions and how it affected the district and what we did, what actions we took to help mitigate that and what we didn't do, and take a look at the sewer enterprise fund, because that's one of the critical areas we're addressing is the inadequacy of the rate revenue to cover expenses. We've talked about this at length. Our auditors have brought this to our attention. We need to address this, especially if we want to become eligible for state grants and low-interest loans, because we do not have enough sewer revenue to cover our sewer operations. This chart shows you a history of our rates going back to 2001. I omitted 2002 to 2005 because they did not change. And this is on page 3 of your handout. As you can see, it's broken out into different columns, O&M, R&R, which didn't begin until 2013, both water and sewer. So you can see between 2001 and 2006, rates were not changed. Then in 2007, the district performed a rate study, which set the rates for the next 5 years for incremental increases in both sewer and water. Now, during the time that this rate model was being set, the district was at its height of development. If you remember, we were getting between 400 new connections a year. And the housing industry was booming in the county. So the rate models that we were looking at took into account that projected growth, which means new accounts and new revenues, in addition to increased rates on our existing accounts. So what I want to do is take you to this chart that I actually lifted this from my 2008-9 budget presentation to the board. I've updated it a little bit, but if you look at this, in the rate model, we were looking at 500 new connections in 2007-8, 555, increasing to 611 new connections. These are new connections each year. So the rate model anticipated by year 11-12 an additional $1.3 million in water revenues based on new connections. This isn't the connection fee, this is base revenue plus consumptive revenue that can be used for operations. Similarly, on the sewer side, we were looking at almost similar numbers in new connections, a little bit less, but $1.8 million in new revenues. As you all are well aware, that Great Recession hit the housing industry in Calaveras County dramatically. As you can see up here in, I'm sorry, I forgot my glasses, 2005, we peaked out at the number of new connections. And then look at the drop we had over the years and throughout the years. And we're looking at, in this case, less than 50, anywhere between 50 and 60 connections, new connections a year. What does that do? That reduces our ability to get new connections, new ratepayers, new revenue to help spread the costs out amongst everyone. Jeff, you're well aware of this, and we've talked about this at length over the things that really hold back some of the issues of development here, and we need to understand that this has been a driving point, and we've always wanted to look at new connections to help improve this district.
Absolutely.
So what actually happened? So when you look at the revenues, if you look at the new connections, let's just go straight out to fiscal 11-12. Instead of the $1.3 million, we received $85,000 in new revenue. Instead of $1.8 million, we're looking at $78,000 in new revenue, $79,000 in sewer. That threw the whole model off. That's we were projecting those revenues over time to balance the budget. That included some R&R, some CIP money that we were going to use to help renovate the system. That was including O&M costs, replacement of equipment and vehicles. It just didn't happen. So we had to adjust. Oh, here's one more summary, just showing a summary of what I just said. But the other part of it is down at the bottom under property tax revenues. The foreclosures in this county hurt county property tax revenue significantly. In fiscal year 2008-9, the district received $3.4 million in property tax revenues. In fiscal 12-13, down to $2.3 million. So that's less revenue for the district to be able to utilize Right now, in 17-18, we're projecting 2.9 million, still less than what we received in 8-9. Almost 10 years later, we have not recovered as a county and as a district. How did the district respond to the Great Recession? We cut number of positions. We reduced FTE, that's full-time equivalent, in other words, employee positions. We went from 72 to 66. We did layoffs. I think you remember we were there. We reduced staff. We had some voluntary retirements, but it made things more difficult. Employees agreed to 3 years at 0% COLAs, no increases during that time frame. PERS costs, the employee share of PERS costs was shifted from the district to the employee. And that's 8% of the gross salary. In today's dollars, that's almost $500,000 the district has saved for 17-18. We refinanced debt that saved us over $500,000 over 7 years. But we also had to shift more of the property tax revenues from reserves into the operating fund. We reduced expenditures and we cut capital outlay. That's a vehicle and equipment. But we had very little choice. Then, as we were coming out of the recession, the drought, the state drought, and their mandated reduction in water consumption hit us. And we can go on for that for hours in that discussion. But if you look up here, in fiscal year 12-13, we had about a little over $1.4 million in consumptive revenues. This is the water usage charge. And you can see over time, as our customers have reduced water consumption, our revenue on that side also dropped to $740,000. Our customers are rebounding now, they're coming up, and the numbers we have on the far right column, 17-18, are to date. I anticipate that to be well over $1 million, and our new model moving forward shows more revenue. It's important to understand, yes, we lost revenue. We are not trying to recover that revenue through this rate study. We're not looking back to replenish what we used in revenue or in reserves to cover that. We're only moving forward.
Jeff, I've got a question. Did you also include the reduction in hydro revenues during the drought?
No, I did not, as far as Hogan is concerned. That's a good point, Director Strange.
And so what is that number? Both, I would assume Hogan as well as the North Fork.
The North Fork is not tied to production. It's tied to a Bureau of Reclamation construction indicator, so it's been going up gradually. Hogan has fluctuated. At the lowest, we lost, our revenues were down maybe 100 to 150,000.
Total or per year?
Per year. So that can be significant.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's not consistent, nor is at times, it's not always predictable.
Right.
How did we respond in this case into the reduced revenues? We did not, your board did not apply a drought surcharge like a number of other agencies did. Your board made the conscious decision of living within our means, cutting costs, and using reserves. We reduced operating expenditures to be able to do that. We cut one more body. We're down to 65 employees. We continue to shift property tax revenues from reserves to operating budget. We're thinking basically it's got to end sometime. We've got to try to limit the burden on our ratepayers. We deferred, again, equipment and vehicle replacement purchases. And again, there is no plan to recover any of these lost water consumption revenues through this upcoming rate plan. The other item I mentioned that was key for us is our sewer fund. We have, for several years now, we have known that the sewer fund was not collecting enough revenue to cover its costs. That's been a deficiency. We decided a couple years back to change auditors to get a fresh look at our financial numbers. They confirmed that. And what we're now looking at is, since water and sewer have to be two separate funds, and water has been, quote unquote, through its reserves, loaning money to the sewer fund to keep it afloat. The sewer fund has built up a deficit over the last 2 years of $716,000. We've talked about that at length. That money has to be repaid to the water reserves, the reserve fund, and your board has chosen to do so in a 10-year payback period. We looked at short-term, long-term, and because this is having to be paid back in interest, the optimal choice was 10-year payback.
Jeff, we do us a favor and explain to everybody how and why the water and sewer have to be on their own, that we can't over a long period of time subsidize one with the other.
Certainly, and if I can't answer it completely, I know Sean will be able to do it. Under Proposition 218, which a lot of people, actually it's Article 13D, Section 6, I believe, of the California Constitution, which was amended by Prop 218 in 1996 by the voters. It basically says you have to have balanced budgets in each of your funds. We're basically nonprofit, but the rates, one rate group cannot subsidize another. Within, say, a water fund, certain customers cannot subsidize other groups of customers, nor can one enterprise, such as sewer enterprise, subsidize water, and vice versa. And Sean, is that pretty much it?
Well, just to take it a little step further, we have 13,000 water customers. We can't ethically ask half and only 5,000 sewer customers. We wouldn't ask the water customers who have nothing to do with sewer to pay the sewer bills. They have to be independent to be fair.
Exactly. Very good. So the loan payback is a 10-year loan payback, and it adds about $274 per bi-monthly bill. And that is something we decided that must be included in a loan payback, and the 10-year payback option we thought was the most equitable. As I mentioned earlier, right now, the sewer fund does not have enough debt coverage ratio. What's debt coverage ratio? If you want to go out and secure a loan, or in this case, even grants at the state, you have to have sufficient revenues to cover your expenses. In the sewer fund, we do not. We are eligible for significant grant money, one, to update the West Point Wellesleyville sewer treatment plant and other projects that we're looking down in Copperopolis. We don't even qualify for 100% grant because the state says you don't even have enough revenue to cover your costs. Why should we give you money? So that's another part of this sewer enterprise fund deficiency that we've talked about and that we're addressing. So at the end of the 5-year plan, we're going to be there, and the state will see this plan and get us moving along through that grant application process and approval process.
Excuse me, I know that Jeff mentioned we have 5,000 sewer customers, but can you give us an idea of where we're situated? Because if everybody remembers, Calaveras County is 1,000 square miles, and our sewer facilities or our sewer treatment plants are spread all over. If we were connected, maybe we could do something, but each one acts as its own entity.
And that's true, Director Underhill, and that's one of our challenges on both enterprise sites, water and sewer. We have sewer in West Point Wellesleyville, 2 plants within a couple miles of one another. The idea is to get state grant money to consolidate them to save money. Don't have to have duplicate permits. La Contenta, and I'm not quite sure the numbers because I haven't memorized those, but I believe, and Copper, between Copper and La Contenta, we have about 2,800 sewer customers. Then you have Southworth, an area that you have to deal with. Wallace, about 100 customers. Then you have Forest Meadows, you have Douglas Flat, Vallecito, you have up in the Arnold area. So we are spread out, and you have to have numerous plants, and it makes it very difficult to keep costs down because you don't have the economies of scale that larger urban areas do.
We also have a system in much of the sewer in that there are individual tanks on properties, and it's the liquid then that goes into our treatment facility and requires that we pump out those tanks on a regular basis, which is not the normal when you look at the typical wastewater systems. So that increases our cost by having to go and service those tanks on a regular basis rather than pipelines of everything flowing to a central treatment facility.
That's a very good point.
And I don't think that people really understand the significant added costs associated with those, and those are in a lot of the disadvantaged communities that we're serving. So there's a higher sewer cost in areas that folks generally have less financial resources to deal with.
And I haven't even touched upon the regulatory side of it and some changes.
Yeah, and
Right.
that, just to quickly point on that, every one of those 12 wastewater systems and 6 water systems has its own permit issued by the state itself under state and federal law. And so we do not get to set the terms for how these systems are constructed or how they're operated. We're at the mercy of state regulators. And if we don't meet our obligations on those permits, it can be thousands of dollars, possibly millions of dollars in liability to us, and very serious, possibly jail time for individuals on some of these permits. So that's the other side of it that is not seen by most people, but it is. We cannot be on that side of delivering safe, reliable service. If we fail to meet our legal obligations, the results can be financially disastrous for us.
Well, and the permits aren't forever, and they're not stagnant as far as the regulations go. That's
Exactly.
what
They get
point I really
updated
try to make to
continuously.
people is,
Yeah.
We've been under 8 years of a very aggressive EPA with our former president. We've been under 3 or 4 decades of environmental extremism in California, and those rules change, and they're going to continue to change. And we still have to meet those requirements. We can't set these requirements, even though if we were left to our own ideas, I'm sure we could treat this stuff safely, but the state of California makes up the rules for us. And they're generally the same rules that somebody down in Oakland or the big municipalities, we have to do the exact same things. In some cases, much worse. We're not allowed, like the city of Stockton, to actually decant into the river. We have to treat it to a drinking water quality standard in most cases on our sewer treatment plants.
The challenges we face can be daunting. And like I said, I've been here 10 years. And I thought coming from city and county to a water district would be a lot more stable. I've faced 10 years of challenges. And we're going to continue to face challenges. But through this work that we're doing here, through this rate plan, through what work HDR's done, we're creating a roadmap to having self-sustaining funds, water and sewer. And that's what my goal is for this district to be able to fund its operations and make itself eligible for grants, for funding, for loans that we need, because you can never do pay-as-you-go on CIP and capital renovation. The costs are just so astronomical at times, you're going to have to borrow money. And banks and bond buyers always look at your financials. So far, we're doing pretty good. And with this rate plan, we're going to get better. Okay, moving on to the next phase. So all this being said, taking into account all what's happened up to last year, we worked with HDR to create what is the basis for their cost of service study. They need some financial numbers to start with. And we started with the projected, with the 17-18 budget that your board adopted. So that's the basis. We looked at forecasting tools for escalation of certain costs, inflationary costs, to determine future revenue expenditure projections. Work closely with them. As I said, Sean and his team have had years of experience in doing this, especially in California. The forecast confirmed that we're not collecting enough revenues, and in fact, it identified a combined funding gap of $1.4 million for next year, fiscal year 18-19. The budget we're going to be talking about starting next week or the week after. So here's a summary of the funding gaps. This is the same slides that you saw back in September, the ones we worked on to go through this process. And it mapped out our deficiencies over the next 5 years, and this was based on 17-18. We needed to refresh some of our information, and that's why the next slide you'll see several changes. But we also took a fresh look at how can we address these funding gaps. We can do it by increasing rates. We can do it by reducing expenditures, a combination of both. But what your board directed us to do is take a look at reducing rates, reducing the gap first. And what we did was we looked at a target of 20% of the funding gap to be closed by rates. Now, if you remember correctly, the way our costs are split, it's generally probably a 70-30 split. It's different for different types of departments. 70% of our costs are allocated to water, 30% to sewer. So if you're trying to drive to the sewer number, you have to cut more in the water number. So that's why we're looking at reducing the target of 163,000 in water, plus the additional 171, which we're looking at to get to that sewer target of 139,000. We also revisited our water consumption revenue projections because we were seeing another summer of increased water usage. So that's why we added another 150,000 to get us back on track. But this particular exercise cut $475,000 out of our 18-19 budget projection. So we started cutting on the expenditure side. And this is the basis of this information is the basis of what we gave HDR to prepare their forecast. And Sean's going to go into that. One of the other areas we looked at is agricultural water. Now, the district supplies raw water to agricultural users below, on the Calaveras below New Hogan. The water use is between 1,200 and 1,500 acre feet a year. Annual revenue is 7,800. It's not a whole lot, but we wanted to bring the rates up to a more current level. The current rates were done in late 70s, early 80s. It's at $9.70 per acre foot. We did reach out to the growers and farmers in the area. Peter Martin, our water resources manager.
Let's clarify the whole grower thing here. Not the popular sense of growers, but we do serve some agricultural walnuts in the lower part of the area. That's who we're talking about.
Yeah, so, yeah, long existing farms.
Right.
And again, this is raw water, untreated. It's stored at New Hogan, so that the cost related to their access to this water is the storage component. They divert it from the river themselves. They convey it to the property. It's simply the storage component. So that's why there's a differential.
As you said, walnuts and cherries.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
Right.
And there are not a whole lot of them down there. The driving impetus for raising the agricultural rates is our costs, our share of the operational costs of New Hogan, and those costs are initiated by Army Corps of Engineers. They operate it. Jumped dramatically in May of 2016 for improvements they made to the gates and the dam itself. It went up from 155,000 to 293,000. Or it increased 155,000. So it's only equitable for the farmers to help share in some of those costs. So in looking at this, we're looking at water rates, sewer rates, agricultural rates, and the other item that Sean will go over is water shortage rates that are only in there for contingency purposes, not automatic.
So I've got a question then, Jeff. This increase, 112% increase by the Army Corps in New Hogan, is that a one-time deal
Annual cost.
to handle? So because they had to adjust their gates one time, they've now hit us with 112% increase every year from now on.
What they looked at is their historical costs for operating a dam. Then they made some improvements in the dam and the gates themselves, and then they amortized those costs that they did over 5 years, and that's why it's a combination of their operational increases plus the cost for their improvements that we split with Stockton East. But yes.
For 5
it
years.
goes on for 5 years. Now, at the end of that 5 years, they'll reevaluate where their costs are and let us know what our share is.
Okay.
Again,
Just
it's-
another example of something like that that occurs that I don't think the public's aware of is when Caltrans decided to improve in Valley Springs area, Vista del Lago and Highway 26, we were then required, because we had a sewer line in the easement, we were required to lower that easement. It wasn't anything that we knew about or planned for, but we were required to do that at the cost of $150,000. Just because they wanted to make a change with the road. But that was a cost that we had to bear.
Yeah. And along those lines, and I know it's not significant, but it just goes to show you the lack of control we have over increasing costs. DSOD increased our rates this year, or this past year, 10% for our fees for our dams. We have several of them we have to
That's
permit.
the Department of Dam Safety, is it?
Yes, it is. And that's in direct response to the failure at Orville, not our failure, but their failure. Next year, it's going up 20%. And we have no control over that. At this point, I want to turn it over to Sean, who will talk about the cost of service study, all the legal requirements, how we've met those legal requirements, and take us through the rate study, and then I'll do a wrap-up after that.
All right. Good job, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. President Ratterman, directors, appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon. As Jeff mentioned, I'll be walking you through the water and sewer rate studies. So I'll start off by talking about the rate study process, the steps we go through, why we go through those steps. Then we'll take a look at what some of the key assumptions of the study are. A lot of the upfront piece is what Jeff just spoke to you all about. And then we'll get into the specifics of the cost of service analysis, which is the key component of developing cost-based rates. And then ultimately the proposed rates for the water and sewer utilities. So I wanted to start off with a little quick discussion on Proposition 218. As Jeff mentioned, this is the California Constitution, Article 13D. And what this does is it outlines the requirement for setting and implementing property-related rates and fees. So water and sewer fall under this requirement. And what it needs to meet this intent is to develop the cost basis. So as Jeff talked about and we spoke about earlier, there cannot be any subsidies between the two utilities. One cannot be paying for the other. We can't use water revenues to pay for sewer costs or vice versa. The same is true within the water or the sewer utility. We want to make sure that one customer is not paying a higher proportional share than the other customer. And so we're making sure that we have a cost basis or a relationship between the costs that are incurred on the system to provide service versus the benefit or the service that the customers are receiving. As part of it, it requires the customer notification, which you all sent out, and Jeff will talk about this a little more at the end. And then the board has the ability to adopt these rates if there's not a majority protest. So the question is, how do we establish cost-based rates? And so if you look at the AWWA, American Water Works Association, M1 manual, that outlines the approach for setting water rates. On the other side, the Water Environment Federation, WEF, has their manual practice number 27. Talks about how you establish rates specifically for wastewater or sewer utilities. So as part of what we've done is we've taken that approach, and that's outlined in both of those manuals, and we've applied that to the district's specific costs and customer characteristics. So we're really tailoring this to the costs you incur and how your customers utilize the system. So we start with the revenue requirement or the financial plan. That's really what Jeff was talking about, is coming back and determining what is the overall level of revenues necessary to prudently fund the district's operating and capital needs over the next 5-year period. So as we talked about, we look at O&M expenses, we got to pay the bills, as well as any of those capital improvements that are necessary to maintain the system. And so we look at both pieces to develop what that projection is. So this is essentially the checkbook for each utility. We look at water separately from sewer. Once we know the overall revenue needs or the size of the pie, then we allocate that in the cost of service analysis. And this is where we take the water pie and we say what piece of that pie goes to the residential customer class versus the non-residential customer class. and how that's split based on how customers use the system. So it's based on water for average day or peak day needs, on wastewater it's based on total volumes from each class and the strength of those wastewater, which can drive the treatment process. So once we know the overall size of the pie and the revenue requirement, how much is allocated to each customer class, then we're able to come back and design rates based on those two pieces. So the cost of service analysis establishes the rates for year one of the 5-year plan. And that says here's what they are on a fixed basis or on a consumption basis for the study. And so that's the basis for that component. And that's really the key document here that we look at as we go through this, because you don't capture costs by we worked on a residential pipeline, or we worked on a non-residential pipeline, or today we only treated residential sewer flows, tomorrow we'll treat the non-residential sewer flows. That's not how utilities work. So this approach allows us to equitably allocate the cost between the different customer classes of service based on how they use the system. Those unit costs or cost-based rates, as I said, then become the overall rates that we'll look at. So some of the key assumptions, as Jeff talked about, revenues have been impacted based on the recent drought. Consumption levels are not back to those pre-drought levels. However, as you'll see, we have bumped them up a little bit because we have seen some increase as some of the state mandates have been lifted. However, as we've talked in the past, the state is also working on their conservation plan, which they're leaning back towards targeting where we were during the drought. So looking back at those consumption levels. So we have adjusted to reflect what has happened recently. The district, as Jeff spoke about, talked about, put together their overall funding needs based on a reduction in costs and rate adjustments. And again, we are borrowing for sewer from water to fund this transition plan over the 5-year period. That was a big point of our discussion that we went through as part of developing this plan, was to minimize those rate adjustments on the sewer side over this 5-year period. We worked with the board and an ad hoc committee to look at the current customer classes of service, the rate structures, and what those revenue transition plans were to establish what some of those goals were for the study as we went through it. So I'll start off with the water utility. Some of the key assumptions, we based our revenues on current rates and customer statistics. Essentially what that means is we took the current number of customers, the consumption data for the last year, and we calculated under those current rates, what would that revenue look like. We then adjusted that to reflect what recent consumption data had shown as it had come up as we went through the study. As we said, we've been working on this for about 7 months or so. So when we started, we had older data. We've added new data into that analysis since the drought mandates have been lifted. We started with the current budget, and we escalated that based on historical inflationary factors that the district has seen. And we developed a capital funding plan to fund those improvements going forward. Again, no new debt as part of this from a capital side. We're not issuing long-term borrowing to fund any projects over this 5-year period, and it included those cost reductions that Jeff talked about. So what does this look like? Based on the revenue requirement, again, this is our first box that we're looking at. If you look at the first column of numbers in 2016-17, we collect about $13.6 million in revenue. We have O&M of 13.5, annual debt service of $2 million. We're offsetting some transfers in from other reserve funds to reduce debt. We have a total revenue requirement of $13.1 million. So in 16-17, there was a slight surplus on the water side. As you move into 17-18 budget, that bottom line, the balanced efficiency, the blue line there, you'll see that that goes more negative over time. That assumes that there are no rate adjustments implemented by the district. That's ultimately what we're trying to determine through this analysis, is what are our revenue needs over the long term. Our revenues go back and tie to the chart that Jeff showed you, where we had the decline in housing. We're down at that low level for our projections of growth in this study, based on what we've seen the last several years. Our O&M expenditures are based on annual inflationary, 2 to 3% as we go forward. And then we have our debt service based on our actual schedules that are there. What this means to fund the deficiency in water over the next 5 years for 2018-19 through 22-23 is rates would be adjusted just below 2% a year on the water side. So that's the size of the pie. The size of that pie is going to get 2% bigger each year. That does not mean that all customers are going to see a 2% change in their bill, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through this process. So now that we know the size of that pie, how much revenue is necessary to fund the district based on that analysis, then we allocate the cost through the cost of service analysis. And we have 3 customer classes of service. We have residential, non-residential, and irrigation or landscape. So residential are your typical single-family homes. It's the vast majority of your customers on your system. Non-residential are any customers that are not residential customers, so it may be small businesses, larger businesses that are out there, as well as our last class of irrigation or landscape. These are customers with a separate meter specifically in place for outdoor watering. So this is treated water that is then used for irrigation purposes. Yes, sir.
Sean, just as clarification, what percentage, I know most of our customers are residential. Do we have I mean, it's well over 90%, I'm pretty sure, that what we're talking about mostly here is residential.
Correct. 96%.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
As we looked at that, one of the key components of the cost of service analysis is being able to determine and develop those customer classes. So what we try and do is to place like customers in like groups, and that's what we've done as we've gone through this process with these customer classes. And then we have to allocate the cost to the rate structure component. So the residential customers are charged under a 4-tier rate structure, and we'll get into that a little bit more. So we allocate costs to each tier on a both consumption and a fixed basis. And that's one of the key elements of the cost of service, is coming back to determine what that fixed charge component is, as well as what that tier pricing charge is going to be. And that's based on the characteristics of the customers that use water at those levels. The non-residential and irrigation is a uniform rate, and so it's based on their overall usage. Again, their characteristics are similar, it just depends on how much water they use. So you could have a small business that uses a little bit of water and a big business that uses a whole lot of water. It's hard to do a tiered rate structure that's equitable to both customers. So just because somebody's using more water doesn't always mean that they're doing something wrong. So that's what we're trying to capture as part of this. So when we allocate those costs, what we do is we compare it to the current revenue. So for residential, non-residential, and irrigation other, we take their present rate revenue, that's the first column. We compare that to the allocated revenue requirement, and this bottom line is the system total. Again, that's that 1.7% that was shown on the revenue requirement slide. And we look at how those are compared to that total. So overall, in all the studies I do, this is a fairly close result. Everybody's right around that 1.7%. So that's a good thing. That means in general, your current rates are cost-based. We do have to make some minor tweaks to the rates, but that's the basis for our analysis. So what this says is that from the residential class, we need to collect $10.2 million from the residential customers, $748 from non-residential, and $237,000 from irrigation customers. And that becomes the basis for our rate designs as we go forward.
Excuse me. And so what that was saying is that we were collecting almost, but not quite enough in our water rates.
Correct. Yes, that is correct. And these change over time.
Right.
So every
Yeah.
time you do the study, it's never going to be perfect. I haven't had one yet in almost 20 years. I haven't had one come out just exactly perfect. But they're usually close. So like I said, this is a very tight range of the difference between your current rates and the proposed revenues that we need. So on the rate design for the water utility, we've used that cost of service as the basis. It establishes the unit cost or the rates for year one, in this case fiscal year 18-19, to meet the requirements of Proposition 218. We do again look at the fixed versus variable or consumption component. That's an important consideration when you look at utilities, whether it's water or sewer. The vast majority of the costs are fixed. We know what those are gonna be from a year-to-year basis. The variable component is usually a little bit of chemicals, electricity, things of that nature that change. But if you did not sell a drop of water, you would still incur a majority of your costs. So we're capturing that through that fixed component of the rate. So some of the proposed changes in the rate structure for residential customers, we're removing the allowance of the water in the fixed charge. So currently right now, it allows the first 1,000 cubic feet, or which is equal to, each cubic foot is 7.48 gallons, so that's roughly 7,500, gosh, I cannot talk, sorry, 7,500 gallons that those customers are using as part of that. And so we've eliminated that. We're eliminating the variable tier size. So what you have in place today is, as the larger the meter size, the wider the tiers become for those customers. We're eliminating that and going to keep those tiers for all residential customers. So all customers will have the same tier sizes.
Excuse me, Sean, let's go back to point number one again, the no water allowance in the fixed charge. Just so we all understand, our basic rate included 1,000
Correct,
cubic feet. The 1,000 cubic feet is being eliminated because we would hear over and over again, why am I paying for 1,000 cubic feet? I'm not using it.
Correct.
We would hear that over and over again.
And Director Arnell, to that point, the reason in trying to give our customers as much control as possible over their bill and its relationship to how much water they use, with the requirements under 218 and those continuously evolve with the court cases that have been decided and continue to be decided since it was adopted in 1996. If we are to include any water in the base rate, we would have to charge for that. So that means the base rate would be higher. And again, that would be a flat charge that, again, if people don't use the 1,000 CF, then they would still have to incur that. And again, we're trying to be responsive to what we heard. The vast majority of people we talked with said, I only want to be charged for the actual water that I'm using.
On the non-residential, the same water allowance is being eliminated, but it is going to a uniform or the same rate for all consumption. So the current rate structure, there's a fixed charge. This includes both the operating and capital component that increases based on the meter size. That differential between the larger meters is based on the capacity of that meter. So they can get X times more water through that larger meter size, and that's a generally accepted approach to adjust your fixed meter charges. Tier 1, again, that's the 0 to 1,000. That's included in the base rate right now. These are the present rates. Tier 2, Tier 3, and Tier 4 at $1.44, $1.80, and $2.30. And you can see the different tiers based on the meter size. So when we had this applied to all customers, so all customers paid under this rate structure.
100 cubic feet is 750 gallons.
Correct.
So it's a tank about that big around by about 8 feet.
Under the proposed rates, as we talked about, we would remove the allowance or the included water. What you can see is the fixed charge went down for the 5/8 inch meter. We are now charging for Tier 1 for residential customers. It's $1.09. Tier 2 is $1.14. Tier 3, $1.56. Tier 4, $1.77. The tier sizes remained the same. Those reflected typical consumption patterns, and that's what we've come back to look at, is how we identify what those tier sizes are as part of that. And then non-residential and irrigation have a specific rate, but a rate based on their consumption characteristics as part of the cost of service analysis. So what does this look like going out over time? You can see if you focus on the meter charge, the 5/8 would reduce from 113 a month to 112, and then that is adjusted by the 2%, or roughly just under 2% each year. The consumption charge for residential customers, there's 0 in the first 1,000 cubic feet. That would go to $1.09, and you can see that each of the subsequent tiers have actually decreased based on the overall revenue needs. So what was unique when we went back and looked at the data, a good majority of your consumption is in that first 1,000 cubic feet. So it gets back to what Director Underhill was saying. A lot of the customers stay under that 1,000 amount each bi-monthly billing period as part of that. So that is the majority of the consumption. So what does that look like for a residential customer? On the left-hand side, you'll see varying levels of consumption in 100 cubic feet. So this would be 2,000 cubic feet as we go forward. So you can see bi-monthly, that bill, if you had no consumption, would go down a little bit. And then you can see the total change and the bill varies by customer. After this year, the adjustment is based on that overall revenue need percentage, the 1.8% for all residential customers. This is that 1 year realignment to cost of service and to establish the rate structure that we have in place that we're proposing as part of this.
Just to note on that real quick, Sean, that
Yep.
if you look at the chart, so on the in the highlighted area is currently what is our average water user and what that would look like in the way of the increase. But if you look at on the lower end of usage, and this really kind of speaks to if we have customers who are on fixed incomes who are trying to keep their bill down. If you use less water, you can make a pretty dramatic difference in the amount of your bill. And likewise, on the higher end water users, they're seeing a smaller increase as well. And I know that seems to be, for some that might not, when you first see that, it might not make sense. But the reason for that, again, is because we're trying to be, to allocate those costs of that actual usage of additional water as accurately as we can so that we're proportional in what we charge them and that it meets all the requirements of 218. So that's the net effect of it. And we actually had some people we've talked to who they assumed that they would be in that middle range and how the rate increase would affect them. And after we did the calculation, they found that it was actually a much less impact to them because of how they're using water. Lastly, I just want to note, because of if someone is truly trying to keep their rate down, their bill down, if they use less water, we're, and this is something Joel and we talked to the board about, we are going to make sure that we have all of the information available to the public about ways that they can improve their efficiency, rebate programs to put in higher efficiency, things within their home or their outdoor irrigation if they continue to do that, so that we give people the tools to be able to help control the amount of their bill if that's what their goal is.
So the last piece of the water is the drought and water use reductions. So this is a tool that we've developed for the district that could be implemented in future droughts if the board determines it's necessary. This is based on the urban water management plan and the targets within that plan. So you can see the stages in the table. Advisory stage, it would be a 10% reduction. Alert is 11 to 15 and so on. Those were the basis for establishing the water shortage rates. And what we would do is we look at what is the impact to the district's revenue at a decrease in consumption at each of these stages. So at an advisory stage, we have a less than 10% reduction. That would reduce our total volumes by 135,000. That would reduce revenues by approximately $181,000. Go all the way to the bottom to stage 5. It's a reduction of 681,000 in consumption. It reduces the revenues by 883,000. That delta or that change is what we divide through by the remaining consumption to establish what that shortage rate would be in that year. So under stage 1, it would be 15 cents all the way up to $1.29 for stage 5 based on the reduction in the overall consumption. And then those would be added to the proposed rates at that time period. So whatever those adopted rates are, if you adopted this current plan, whatever those would be, these would be in addition to them. So the only way these are implemented is if the board directs staff to implement these during some sort of water shortage event, and then the board would also lift those when the water shortage event goes away. So this is just a tool for you all to have. As Jeff mentioned, a lot of utilities implemented these during the past drought. Putting them in place during a drought is not the time to do that. It's a tool that you have available if things become absolutely necessary. And that's one of the items that we all discussed during the development of this, is that is to reflect those significant stages of drought or water shortage.
And this is what Jeff mentioned, that the board decided that we were going to pass on the drought surcharge when we were going through that
Correct.
difficult time.
And that option would still exist. I mean, even if we were in a declared drought under our drought contingency, water shortage contingency plan, and we were at a stage, any of these stages that are listed on here, the board would still have the discretion to decide what, if any, of this surcharge will be put into place. And it wouldn't necessarily have to go to the same level as where the declared stage of shortage is. I mean, we could be in a stage 4 or even a critical stage, and the board might make the decision that it'll activate a lower level of this surcharge. So all of those options remain, and none of those decisions will be made except here in the boardroom in a public meeting that is noticed and the public has the opportunity to be in.
And if for some reason it had to go beyond that, we'd have to go through a 218 process.
Correct. The agricultural rates that Jeff talked about, currently $9.70 per acre foot. As part of that, the district staff went through and did an analysis, and you can see the proposed rates on the bottom half of the sheet, $12 per acre foot in 18-19, increasing to $18 an acre foot starting in fiscal year 2020, 2021, and the following 3 years. So these haven't been updated since the 80s, so those reflect those changes in costs. Sewer utility, same key assumptions as Jeff spoke about earlier. We base this on the current customer characteristics as well, and the budget with the cost reduction plan put into place, as well as the current capital improvement plan. Again, this does require additional borrowing from water to implement the rate transition plan that we're looking at right now. And what that looks like, you look at the revenues currently, we're at about $6.5 million over the projected time period. Again, very minimal growth based on the recent data we have. Expenditures, you can see, are greater than revenues. So that's where you've been the last couple of years, where before we even start talking about capital or other needs, we're not funding our overall O&M expenses as part of that. So we add in our debt service, our replacement funding.
Excuse me, in respect to the speaker, could we keep the conversations at the back of the room down or take them outside?
He can't hear you.
So the revenue requirement overall
I
is,
think you've already heard all of this in the presentations before.
Excuse me, in respect to the speaker, can you, we're allowing him to speak and just be a little bit.
Then we'll allow you.
You'll have your opportunity.
Well,
Thank you. You'll have your opportunity, sir.
I hope so. Yeah.
Thank.
Well over an hour.
so
Your director shows up late. That's like not real polite for the rest of us.
So based on the overall revenue requirement plan, we have about $7 million up to about $8 million based on the overall transition. As we develop that does include the additional borrowing from the water fund. So that reflects the 4.1% annual revenue increase over this next time period. Key assumptions of the cost of service. We have 2 classes of service, residential and non-residential. They're both charged under a fixed rate basis. We are continuing the use of the multiplier. Overall, again, very tight cost of service from a relationship standpoint. You can see the slight differences here. Our overall revenue of 4.1%. They're both right within 1% or so of that overall. So again, good sign. Current rates are pretty close to what our allocated costs are. What that looks like over the 5-year period. We developed that plan. You can see approximately $7 to $8 bi-monthly on the sewer side as well for those adjustments. And again, this transition plan is based on that borrowing from water to make sure we can meet that. With that, I'll turn it over to Jeff to talk about a couple final comments on the study.
Thank you, Sean.
Some of the key points that I'd like to remind the board is that through this rate-setting process, the cost of service process, we did identify funding gaps, and Sean went through and identified them both the water and sewer. When we looked at the combine of 1.5 million, we're proposing cuts of almost $500,000 in expenditure cuts. Those cuts are not going to be easy, they're going to be painful. We're also adjusted the water revenues, the consumptive revenues up by $150,000 to reflect increase in water usage by our customers. The other thing that I want to bring to everyone's attention is as we were going through this process, we looked at several different options on how to adjust the rates because we knew there had to be some catch-up. The first rate model that Sean proposed was a one-year catch-up. Let's get everything back up to speed on the first year, and then you'll have minimal increases from years 2 through 5. And then we looked at a 2-year and then a level. The leveling model was the one we chose to move forward with because it provided less of an increase in the first year and leveled out those increases over time. However, that did have some consequences. Since we are not collecting enough revenue in year 1, because you were looking at, in this particular case, if I show in here, the water bill would have been $2 per bi-monthly water bill would have been $2 more per every 2 months. The sewer would have been $10 more. Your board felt very uncomfortable with that. But what that means is we're not collecting enough revenue to meet our needs for the first year. So what are we going to have to do? Our revenues are down by about $460,000 because of that. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it was the approach we decided to do. That just means my job in balancing the budget for next year is going to be a little bit more challenging. Again, something I've done every 10 years that I've been here. So we're going to have to cut some more, cut expenses, look at maybe using reserve funds or some borrowing. As Sean said, there's some options there. But again, the burden was shifted back to the district of making some substantial adjustments. I just want to make sure that everybody's aware we're taking cuts on the district side, reducing our costs, not only on the front end of this model, but also on the back end. But after 5 years, we're going to have the ship righted and we're going to be on course to have projected to have sufficient revenues to cover costs in both the water and sewer fund. Just to summarize the rate hearing is that under Prop 218, we do have to mail notices to the affected property owners. These were mailed out on April 5th of 2018, which is more than 45 days prior to the rate hearing. A little footnote to that, you cannot count the mailing date, but you can count the hearing date, and that's a total of 48 days. So we've met that obligation. Under Prop 218, if a majority of the affected property owners file protests, the proposed rate increase cannot be imposed. We have 13,080 water property owners, so that would require 6,541 protest letters. On the sewer side, with 4,848 property owners, a majority plus one is 2,425. As of this morning, and we have received more protest letters since that time, Rebecca gave me an update. We have 907 protest letters on the water side, which is 7%, and 492 on the sewer side, which is 10%, below that threshold. Now, if your board adopts the rates, the first water and sewer rates will become effective July 16th of this year. Future rate increases will occur each July 16th. The water shortage rates will be effective on the same date, July 16th. Actually, that should be 2018 there, my apologies, and will be effective each July 16th from there forward. However, they do not go into effect unless your board approves them, and Dave went into great length about that. And finally, the agricultural rates will become effective July 1 of each year, the first year, January 1 of each year, and the first increase will be January 1 of 2019. And I'm available for questions, and Sean's available as well.
Okay, again,
Questions from the board?
okay, thank you, Jeff. And again, thank you, Sean from HDR. Appreciate your comments. Mr. Egerton?
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I'll be brief. I just wanted to note, and Jeff had just noted the amount of the protest letters we'd received, and again, we'll have some more that are coming in, and we will count those and provide that information. One, just to give you by comparison to our last increase in 2013, again, that was strictly for the R&R capital program, which still is where all the revenue for that program goes. But the protest in that, for that increase was 22% on water and 38% on sewer. So I hope and I believe that the reason that we have fewer protests this time is because, in large part, because of the hard work that staff and the board have done to try to really understand and make changes to address the issues of concern to our customers. This outreach has gone back since last fall when we got through with the financial analysis effort that was done here, that Joel and I in particular have been doing outreach with dozens of members of the community. That ultimately led to, he's been meeting with community groups continuously ever since then and doing presentations, and then the town hall meetings most recently, over half a dozen of those. So, and really that was about trying to get the best information so that we could address the issues of concern and some of the things you saw, like the allocation of water within the basin and volumetric consumptive components and how that was calculated. Lastly, I just want to note that one issue that we heard loud and clear from the public that we personally, I know Joel and I in particular care deeply about this issue, and that is about the ability to provide rate assistance for customers in need. And it's something that we spent a lot of time on, including with our legal counsel and with our experts, financial experts from HDR, and trying to find some way to be able to do that within this effort. The challenge that we have is that as a matter of Prop 218, and again, we have to make sure that what we're doing today complies with that. We cannot allocate rate revenue to subsidize one customer at the expense of another. And so we felt that it wasn't appropriate to try to do something in the way of a program with this rate setting process here. But what we did come away with was a absolute belief that we have to get a program in place, and we have to find some source of funds that are not related to rates that we can utilize consistent with Prop 218, that we can use to help our customers most in need, people in fixed incomes, disabled veterans, whoever the case may be, as the board and our public, our customers, as we work together to define the parameters of our program and who really we want to see that this goes to benefit. I just want you to know, as part of the action today, I would ask the board to provide direction to staff that we come back to you to create and adopt the framework for a customer assistance rate program this year, this calendar year, and have that all of that in place, ready to go. That would be a policy of the board. I would like to have a board workshop, at least one, maybe more, to include members of the public, some of which we met as we did our outreach, and to work through that to come up with a program that is most effective and have that in place and ready to go. And then again, we will do everything we can to find revenue that we can utilize for that, whether it's revenue as we lease additional space on cell towers, whatever it happens to be. If we can find revenue, again, that we can use for this program, that we'll have the program in place, and we can allocate that through the board's action in the future, and we can get this program in place. So with that, I would ask that be part of the direction for us to develop that framework and implement the framework this calendar year. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Dave, I've got a question. Did any of the protest letters address the water shortage issue and the ability of the board to take action to increase rates during the mandatory cutbacks, or in the event that we have a system shut down, we have a shortage of water?
You mean that they specifically address the drought surcharge rate?
Yeah, the surcharge rate or anything.
I'm not aware of any, and I think most of the protests were generally just as to the rates in general, just a general protest of what is in total being presented today. and not broken out to that level to distinguish between one element or another. And again, in our outreach and talking to many people about this, when we explain how the program, how it could work, and again, the discretion being within the board with an action to be, maybe to be taken, again, that would totally be a decision for the board to make in the future in the public setting, simply to have the option, but based on our own experience, it very well may not even be put into place. I didn't hear any strong negative reaction to that after that was explained.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I have a question on your proposal, or you were talking about your recommendation for looking for a framework for the underprivileged or the low-income ratepayers. We will, of course, look at other counties to see if they have any model that we can implement.
Absolutely.
Because I haven't heard of any, and I didn't hear.
They're starting to expand. There are, it's been common with like PG&E and other
Right, and that's
utilities who
always
aren't
yeah.
controlled by Proposition 218. And I know I know it's incredibly frustrating for people out there to say, why are you going through this process the way that you are? Why is the protest process the way it is? All of these things, we're having to comply with the Prop 218 process. Everything we've done, we've made sure that, our legal counsel, our financial expert, everything is meeting the requirements of it. But I can say that it is very promising to see there are agencies that are starting to put these programs into place. Different sources of revenue. Some are using water transfer revenue. Some are using, again, like cell tower revenue. We just have to find a way to do it that is not in conflict with 218. But I want to take the very important step of getting this program in place so that everything is ready to go. All we have to do at that point, it's not an easy task, but then we're ready to go once we can find the financial resources to do it.
And I think the expansion of using the board and the public to come up with a plan, a workable plan, that sounds
You bet.
wonderful.
Okay, well, thank you, Dave.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate your comments, and I can pretty much guarantee you, we will be making a recommendation to come back to us with a customer assistance program before the end of this meeting. We're getting ready to go into the public hearing portion of our meeting. And again, just want to remind everybody to please be respectful and professional in your comments. This is a listening period. We have a listening period for us. It will not be an interaction, a back and forth with the board. It's going to be asking you for your comments. And once the hearing is completed, and once we're going to open the public hearing in a second here, and once we close the public hearing, we will be counting any protests that come in, and the protests will be counted up to the closing of the public hearing. And again, we're going to be needing to have a successful protest is 50% plus one of our customers, and that would be a total of 6,541 protests on the water side and a total of 2,425 protests on the wastewater side. We just got an update of where we were at this point. All comments will be, we're asking everybody to be a 3-minute, each speaker will be provided 3 minutes for your comments, to be respectful of other people's time. And we're gonna have a clock running here. Just to make sure, keep track of that, and make sure that you know exactly where you're at during your comments. We did have a sign-up sheet for anyone who is interested in making a public comment. It's been in the lobby. We announced it at the beginning of the program. If your name is not on here, we'll give you an opportunity at the end of the meeting to make a comment if you haven't been able to sign up yet. I'm sorry?
No.
No, not at all. And if you'd like to, what I just said is, if your name's not on here, we'll give you an opportunity to speak once these people have spoke. Okay, so with that,
Mr. President, would you be in favor of a 5-minute break before we head into more than a half hour of?
sure. Let's we're going to take that would be a good idea. We'll take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to open up the public hearing when we return. Thank you. will be counted at the end of the public hearing. We're back in session from our short break. And so with that, I'm now opening public comment. I'll call speakers to the podium one at a time based on the order of the sign-up sheet. We're going to have a 3-minute period. There'll be a listening session, and if there's anyone else that would like to add their name to the list at the end of the time, we'll have time for that. Again, the public hearing is now open, and with that, Bob Weston.
All right, first of all, I'm from Copperopolis. First of all, I'd like to address the protest letters in order for them to have any, weight. 50% of the participation, I think, is relatively unreasonable. I mean, may I point out, during the American Revolution, probably only a third of the people were for the revolution, a third of the people were against the revolution, and a third of the people didn't care. So when are you ever going to get 50% of anybody to plus or minus one to agree on something, let alone participate, so that's kind of unreasonable, And I know this has always been your policy, so I thought I'd just take this opportunity to address that.
It's not our policy. It's Prop 218. It was voted by the people.
It's state
Of
law.
the state. It's state law. It's not policy. And it has happened. It happened in Valley Springs Public Utility District.
Really?
Smaller districts.
Really?
It's easy to attain. Larger districts, particularly like in the East Bay, very difficult to attain. But you're right.
Very difficult to attain.
But it's not our policy.
I mean, how many do you have that are participating right now? For example, about 900 or something like that, and we need 6,800 or something like that, that's
Right. No,
Anyway, that's one
understood.
thing about it, and, what would it be, in 2001, we had what was it, $44 or something, bi-monthly or something. And all of a sudden, the rates have gone up to $113 bi-monthly. I don't know about everybody else here, but I'm on a fixed income, I'm relatively poor, and these rates are more or less strangling, I have to ask myself, I've heard that, in this presentation that, in Tuolumne County and El Dorado County and a lot of these other counties that, the rates are a lot higher and stuff like that, so we're not, the highest in the state. We are among the highest in the state. I know people that live in Tuolumne County, they don't pay the same amount as I pay. And I don't water my outside lawn, I don't have an outside lawn, I don't do any outside watering at all. And every 2 months, my water rates are $300 or so. So, I'd just like to point out that, this is more or less a strangling situation for people that aren't, very affluent and are on a fixed income, and that's just sort of the way that it is, So I guess that's what I have to say right now, and that's about it. Thank you very much for
Thank
hearing
you.
me. I
Okay,
really
thank you.
appreciate it. Thank
Thank
you,
you, Bob.
guys.
Thank you.
Okay, Jeannie Still?
Hi, I'm also a resident of Copper. And first of all, I'd like to point out that, yes, I agree, the company needs to be able to be equal. It needs to not run at a deficit. What I'm having trouble with is the way they're going about changing the rates. And again, from being on a fixed income perspective, I'm looking at it saying, well, yes, they need to be self-sufficient, but what's considered cost of getting water to us? I heard repeatedly that this base rate is the cost of getting water to us. Is that including the cost of upgrading things or making things newer or changing plants, or should that come out of the water rates? A lot of us have a problem in meeting these new rates, but I'm thinking, why isn't it more that the base rate's lower and more in line with everybody else's base rates in the area, including Tuolumne and all that, and the water rates for the usage we use higher, so that we have a little more control over what our monthly budget looks like, finding new ways for us to stop our utility rates from being so high. You know, for example, if your electric's too high, okay, you don't run your air conditioner, you do a fan, you don't do this, you do that. Water rates go up, okay. Then I'll make sure I recycle what water I do have. Like while I'm waiting for the shower to get hot, I can have a bucket to carry that water and water my plants with or something. But with a base rate being what it is already, there's very little control over managing that budget. And so I'm wondering, well, what is the real cost of getting water to us, and why aren't we paying that? Another thing I heard in the meeting, which concerned me a little bit, and I didn't understand what it meant, was borrowing from the water budget. Am I paying more so that they can borrow from this water budget? I didn't understand what that meant. And I apologize, I'm a nervous speaker. But, so I've just hoped that the board will consider when they look at this, what's the best way to get the money they need with the less harm to the people, as well as a better understanding of what are they borrowing from the water. What do they mean by that? Borrowing from the water to pay for something. But so that's my only two is the way they're going about it, mainly the base rate being as high as it is now versus, oh, okay, you pay more for all the water you use and a higher rate there, but here's the base rate that you have to pay whether you use water or not.
You're doing very well. You needn't be
Thanks.
nervous. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you very much. Bill Davis?
Well, I wasn't gonna talk, but I decided, well, why not? You know, what the hell? But the thing of it is, I can't afford this. I can't afford the rates, and I'm from West Point, a lot of the people in Westport can't afford this neither. And what I don't understand is like the sewer. I've been in my place for over 16 years, and in 16 years, it's only been pumped one damn time. So what the hell do they do, you know? And then the water, I figured up right now, see, I pay $288 every 2 months. So that means I'm paying $144 for the crapper and $144 for the water. So I don't know how you guys justify that, but I also know on that, my daughter lives across the river, and they always tell me, Daddy, they're ripping you. When they put the new water lines in, they told me within 5 years it was supposed to go down. Instead, it's gone up. So I don't understand what's going on here. My son lives over at Comanche Lake. His water bill, and he's sitting right there, his water bill is $23 to $40 a month. So you guys answer all these things. That's all I got to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Marjorie Ramirez?
I won't take up much of your time because I am in a unique situation. I am one owner of 10 owners in a townhouse unit. And so we are paying 10 times, and most of these units, most of the people live in the Bay Area, and they come up anywhere from 1 to 3 times a year. And I know you've run into this, you addressed it earlier. I don't mind paying for what I use, but that base rate should have been dropped. I mean, it should be, I pay $46 a month meter rate in Stockton at my other home. And I pay like $1,500 a year here, my portion of water and sewer. I pay $1,200, less than $1,200 in Stockton, and they have a drought surcharge. So something isn't washing with me. But it may be because we are in a townhouse situation and we're on a 2-inch line. And maybe I need to talk to someone in your organization that maybe we need to be on a smaller line, which may give us a better deal. Because we use like 2,300 cubic feet every other month. And yet, because we're on a 2-inch line, we're allowed 8,000 cubic feet. So we don't come anywhere near that base. You need to have a lower base for people who use a lot less water. And then the sewer is killing us. It's the base rate times 10. And when people, now we're up quite often because we live in Stockton, but a lot of 6 of our 10 people live in Watsonville or Santa Cruz. And they never come up. I mean, we're just amazed at how they can afford the expense of a second home and these are middle-class people. These are not rich people. But I wouldn't do it. But so we live a week in Arnold and a week in Stockton. And that's the only way I can justify it. But to pay less than Stockton for water, where I'm watering a very lush green garden and lawn, and washing cars and doing all the things I can't do in Arnold, and it's less. So but if you can offer me someone to talk to, you know, I can talk to someone one-on-one and maybe take care of it there. Thank you.
That would be recommended. Call the office and you'll be able to do that. Thank you.
Who should I ask for?
Why don't we, Stacy, is she in the room? Stacy, if you could please just give her your card before she leaves today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Faye Malone?
Actually, I just had questions, and you said no questions, so.
Oh, you can ask a question, we'll answer them after the fact, so.
We're making notes, and during our meeting time, we will have an opportunity to address some of these questions. I see everyone's writing here. Faye Malone. Faye, F-A-Y-E. Go ahead.
My question is I think I heard mention of this, does the water district receive any tax revenues from the government? That's a part of what funds the water district also?
It's a
Yes.
quick answer, property
Yes.
taxes, funds,
It's
yes.
not just it's not just the rate we're paying?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And did I also hear that Proposition 218 passed in 1996? Is that correct?
1996, I think is correct.
So 22 years later, we're still working to comply with that?
Oh,
Wow.
no, it's a law that's been in effect. We have to comply every single time we address rates.
Wow, okay,
It's state
All right.
law.
all right. And I think that's it. You guys, thank you for your work, and thank you. Actually, you answered most of my questions with your presentations. Thank you.
All right, great.
Okay, thank you.
There's a variety of other revenue sources that we have, hydro, things like that too. So in addition to ratepayers, just so that you know.
Rates are not the only thing that's keeping the district.
Correct.
And we're continuously looking for more. Robert Vera?
First off, I'd like to point out your mission statement, where it talks about maintaining a cost-conscious effort. And I want to remind you that you are the voice and you represent the people of this district. I understand you oversee the whole CCWD operation from that standpoint, but people count on you to represent them. And I think what you need to take a second look at is expenditures. Okay? I understand you have a lobbyist in Washington DC. Maybe that expenditure could be deleted for a couple of years. There's probably a whole lot more if you let the public take a look at your expenditures, and maybe they could recommend some things that you could knock off your expenditure list. It's a hardship for a lot of us. I'm a Social Security person myself, and these rates keep going up, and they're hurting a lot of people. I took around these 218 forms around to all the real estate offices in Valley Springs, and every one of them put them in their office. And we got a substantial amount of them back from the real estate offices. They are very disappointed in the way this operation operates. They feel that businesses are not coming into the area because the expenses of opening and operating are way too high. Okay, another point I wanted to make was I understand that there were about 66 of these 218 ballots that came back to you that were undeliverable. Now, I'm not sure how you sent them out, bulk mail, but to me, how did you meet the requirements of the 218 laws if 66 of them ratepayers didn't even get notified? So I don't know what we're all gonna do now. I know I've got a couple thousand people behind me. You can't see them, but I've heard from a lot of them, and they're very unhappy about this. I'm gonna ask all of you to reconsider and vote no on this rate increase and take a second look at what other possibilities there are. Think out of the box. As we all know, there's always another way to look at things and maybe solve issues and problems. And I thank you for listening to me, and that's all I have to say.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Gary Caldwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gary Caldwell, Valley Springs. First of all, I want to thank the board for having the town hall in the various regions throughout the county. I think that was a good step on your part. And I also would like to thank Jeff Meyer for taking his valuable time to help me with some of the financial reports and charts and graphs and so forth. I'm just an engineer. I'm not an accountant. So he helped me navigate through a lot of that stuff, and I appreciate his time to do that. One of the other issues I want to bring up is I agree with Mr. Vera that you need to look at expense side, and you can tell me you have. But I noticed in the report from Mr. Korn on page 2, I think it was, page 3, it says revenue requirement. Big bold type up there. Doesn't say expense requirement. And I think too much focus has been given to the revenue side and not the expense side. And I have a handout I received, I think I received it at your town hall session. It says in 2005, wages and benefits for CCWD employees were $4.35 million. In 17-18, the wages and benefits for CCWD employees are now $9.6 million. That's a big increase, almost $5 million. Actually, a little more than $5 million in expenses. So again, I would urge you to look at your expense side and not focus so much on how to balance the books by revenue. Now, I heard Jeff say that not going to try and recoup what you didn't get in consumption revenue from water, but you're not going to look back. You're going to look into the future. However, in the sewer side, oh Lord, however, in the sewer side, there is some back costs that you're going to try and recoup because you borrowed from a reserve fund. So you are going to recover some back losses there. And apparently, from what I understand, is one of the reasons, and the major reason, is there's a shortfall, is because of poor estimating. Well, we didn't know it was going to be, such a low revenue increase or revenue source, and also our expense side is higher than we anticipated. Well, maybe you better make better guesses then on those costs. And the surcharge for drought, oh Lord, the surcharge for drought, DWR tells you you have to cut consumption by 30% or whatever the number is, even though you may have plenty of water. So I don't think that the surcharge imposition should go into effect if we have plenty of water, regardless of what the stage is on the drought.
Okay, thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Judy Peck?
I'm not a public speaker, so this is difficult for me. When I started about this rate increase, I sent out questions The biggest surprise for me was that it was so adversarial. Many of my questions were ignored. They were not answered. I thought this was our water company, and to be treated as if the questions I'm asking don't deserve an answer, I found shocking. And to this day, many of the questions I asked still have not been answered. So I don't feel that you represent me. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Rambo?
Hello, I'm a customer, like all of us here today, and many more that couldn't come. And many people called, and we were told sidestep answers, like Judy's pointed out, emailed people who did not respond. The messages were not passed on. We were given erroneous details, phone numbers, and things like that. It was really frustrating. But, you know, it was a real eye-opener when I came purposely and I met with Rebecca and I saw the box and the responses that were coming through from the county. And I saw the apathy and people just, you know, figuring their voices don't count. And I talked to numerous people. And even yesterday, I was at the board meeting of supervisors, and many people brought that up, you know, and there was even the growers of marijuana there as well. And they were saying, yeah, you know, they're talking about residential, you know, for their moms, their family members, so they're not all doing the same thing. But getting back to this, when I came in with Judy and we dropped off several hundred more the following Monday, we were surprised there was no service map available, you know, to where you guys service. So we went to the utility, we were taken to San Andreas Utility District, and they offered us sewer. And I went to both offices when the gentleman, he drove us, Mr. Vera. And I noticed the radius of our county is very oddball shaped. And you're everywhere. CCW is everywhere. And I'm going, how come we're expanding if you're not servicing the nucleus? You know, what is probing you guys to expand? And then we're hearing, oh, we've got to pump uphill, we've got to go here, we've got to go there. The pumps cost money. We all know that with engineered systems. Anyone that asks that, instead of a septic, knows that they're very costly. But I feel you guys are wasting money and management, mismanagement. You guys are putting things, when you go get grants, you get a grant for a specific item, you're supposed to use that money there. To me, I feel you're putting it in the general fund. You're giving yourselves increases of wages, salaries and things, and you're cutting back on maintenance. And, you know, there's geysers going up. I can speak of my own home, and I brought that up at the vets meeting in Valley Springs. And Band-Aids are you know, all you guys are doing is patching, and you're not actually solving anything, and you're expanding. I don't get it. You guys should be ashamed of yourselves.
Thank you.
Patricia?
Only you people are all going to be mad at me. I'm from Southworth Estates, and we have a beautiful system. But the only big problem, it's the only system that's being used in the West Coast, in Washington and Oregon, and not enough here. If it was used here from the beginning, we would not be having the problems we're having now. And that is the truth. The problems we're having is we have an old system. That's all. You gotta get up. Everyone has to come together and realize you cannot be using septic tanks. You cannot be using leach fields. That's out. We are living in the year 2018. And you have to use modern and better systems. And everyone has to be in the system. Or it's not going to work. Or you're going to have a few like me complaining that I'm going to be paying for you. And that's what's happening. I'm paying a small fortune for somebody else's salaries, for somebody else's sewer system, for somebody else's water. When it is so simple, if you go and look at what system's being used up to date and modern. Okay? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Elaine St. John?
Hi, I'm Elaine St. John. I'm in District 4. I'm a real estate agent, and I want to tell you that I do hear a lot of complaints about water and sewer rates. Whenever I'm driving somebody around and they're a buyer, they just kind of go crazy. But anyway, what I also wanted to talk about is I think that the problem that we have is we don't have the growth that we needed. I don't know how we're going to get that, but hopefully if we get growth, we'll be able to solve some of these problems. The other thing I think we need to look at a little bit more is maybe a little bit more outsourcing, simply because of salaries and benefits and stuff. So if there's anything that you can do about that, that would be absolutely awesome. But I want to talk about my favorite thing, which is water. And it would be the WARN Act. I don't know if the people in the gallery know or understand the WARN Act, but you're looking at getting 100,000 acre-feet of water stored in New Melones. I'm really, really for this. I think it's a great idea. I would like to volunteer any kind of time that I can do. I worked for NFIB lobby group, so I know my way around that way, and I would like to volunteer my time to help, because I think we need some help. I really do. So, like I say, I work for NFIB, I work for a lobby group, I know John Kabachek, who's the head of that NFIB in California, so maybe we can use somebody like me, and you won't have to pay me. So, thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Vicki Mills?
Vicki Mills, I'm from Vallecito, and even though he's not here, I'm going to give my disclaimer because some of his constituents are, and anything I say is my own thoughts and has nothing to do with anybody else's, nor are they his thoughts. That said, one of the problem with the sewer systems that you guys have to maintain is the fact that most of them are in disadvantaged communities. So you get grants for them. Vallecito is a perfect example. But with those grants come strings, like you have to use the newest technology. Unfortunately, newest technology usually is not tested, and you get caught with the cost, as we just saw with Vallecito and replacing those plates. Through no fault of yours, this is an increased cost of yours because the grants come with strings. But as I said, we are a disadvantaged community, and without that grant, we would be in a world of hurt. And I almost said something I shouldn't. Next.
Unrelated, though. It's the same subject.
Next, this is something I said after the rate hearings in 2013, and I'm going to say it again. Anybody that wants to know what is happening in this district with their finances should be coming to the Finance Committee meetings and learning about it there. At the board meetings is not where it should be happening. It should be happening in the Finance Committee because that's where we discuss the finances. They are open to the public, and Patty, she's going to get me for this, would gladly hand out emails with the agendas for that, as she does for me, because I'll tell you, you have been putting up with me since 2013, and I thank you. Now, as I said when this first started, oh crap, when this first started is this rate, when it gets to its final end, is going to be more than I can afford on a fixed income, and I will probably be moving out of the state. Unfortunately, our state laws will not let you do a care program such as PG&E. Next, I want everybody to remember two things. This is not the same management team that put forth the rates in 2013. We have different I'm trying, Scott, I am. We have a different management, and these guys care, and they are doing their job to cut as much as possible.
Okay, thank you, Vicki.
Just one more quick thing. And on the protest, the reason there probably isn't more protest is because two of the main rabble-rousers got elected to the board.
Thank you.
From the 2013 protest.
Okay, is there anyone else that we've gone through our list? Is there anyone else in the room who didn't get an opportunity to sign the list? Go ahead and come on up to the. Should have put a hat on or something.
Yeah, at least go change shirts, Gary.
What's that?
No, I was talking to Gary. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Robert Bauer, and I'm at Southworth Estates also. And since I've lived here, if this all goes into effect, my sewage fees will have gone up over 100%. I'd like to make that kind of money on my money, you know. But also, and I agree with a lot of these other gentlemen, exactly what they said. You know, I mean, we need to look out of the box and check everything out, because I'm not just the only one. There's a whole bunch of us that are out there that probably you aren't going to hear from, you know, for whatever reason, you know. So, and I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Oh, you already had your 3 minutes, sir.
Oh, okay.
That was already tried here in the front row. Got to take off your hat, put on sunglasses or something to make yourself look a little bit different. Anyone else that has not spoken? Yes, please come up to the microphone. Thank you.
My name is Beverly Widener, and I live in Copperopolis. And I appreciate all of you and what you're doing. I think it's very nice that you have all of us here. I went on Google this morning and Googled Calaveras County. One of the things that kind of hit me is they said that it has an unusually high number of employees work in utilities, construction, and public administration, and that in addition to this, they are the highest paid. I think that we should look at cutting that down. I read the explanation in there, and that's very valid. You don't want to lose good people. However, those good people, if they're living in Calaveras County, are paying $250,000 to $500,000 for a home that would cost $1 million in the Bay Area. So if they're looking at moving to a utility district in the Bay Area, they're not going to be ahead by that, by getting a higher salary. I think all of those things need to be taken into consideration. My husband and I are on Social Security. If one of us dies, we're going to have to move out of Calaveras County, because even though our house is paid for, the utilities in this district and the cost of living is too high for one of us to maintain alone. I love it here, you know. And the other thing is that we've been here 2.5 years. I have not received a reassessment of my property or the supplemental. And I just got the information the other day. So now I'm probably going to be hit with $3,000 to $5,000 in additional property taxes that would have been a lot less had they been up to date on their assessments. You know, if you need more volunteers in the system, put out a call. I was a controller of a high-tech company So I'd be happy to volunteer somewhere if help is needed to catch people up. So that's all I have to say, but I do appreciate all that you do in this area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we're going to close the public hearing at this time. We're going to take a short break to the time. Well, for the time to count any ballots that might have come in today and get an update count on the protest ballots. So take a 5-minute recess. Thank you.
Mr. President, I'm going to have to run over to the high school and get my kids. They're about right around 3:45. I plan to come back. I don't know if that makes it any easier.
Clerk Rebecca Hitchcock has done a count of the, and these are going to be unvalidated. We didn't have an opportunity during this short break to validate each one of these, each one of the protest letters. So again, the count that we would need to have a successful protest would be 6,541 on the water side, and we've received a total of 934. So the water side did not come out as a successful protest. And on the wastewater side, we would need a total of 2,425, and we received a total of 512. So the protest was, in this particular rate hearing, has been unsuccessful. We're now, the rate hearing has been closed. We're now opening up this item for board discussion and comments and possible action. And so I'm going to bring it here to the dais at the board level for discussion and possible action. So let me know who would like to speak.
I just have a question whether we were going to address any of the questions that came up with the audience. I don't know if the folks that asked the questions are necessarily still here.
Some are.
We certainly do have that. That is our intent. I saw several of you jotting down questions, and if it is something that you'd like to do, this is the opportunity to answer any questions that we heard today. And so if you'd like to start with any...
Yeah, let me go ahead and start. And I'm just going to let you know, I've got to leave in about 10 minutes to get my kids from the high school. And I had planned on coming back here, and they were going to sit in the audience, as bored as can be, I'm sure, teenage kids. But anyway, I do have daddy responsibilities, and my family always comes first. A couple of things that really bother me. One is the comments about customer service and not receiving information back. That's unacceptable. In my opinion. And we should be ashamed if that indeed happened as an agency and an individual. So I would hope that any of those questions or that process, if it were to happen again, I'm hoping that some real innocent things took place. I don't know, I'm not going to point fingers at anybody, but we are a public agency essentially, and our customers are our #1 priority. So I apologize in advance on that. There were more than one individual that felt as though they were treated unfairly. The second thing is also, I represent all pretty much disadvantaged communities, which are going to economically, those customers are going to be hit the hardest. I do care. But the interesting thing that I'm seeing is from the copper area and all, that there are more individuals that this is going to impact financially to the point they're even considering having to leave the county, if not the state. We're in a terrible situation. I think that, as I've heard a lot, we internally, I believe strongly, need to assess salaries, especially administration salaries, and where they sit in, the whole state and county level. And I agree. And that's not going to make me a very popular guy on the board. But at the same time, the cost of living in this area is much reduced in comparison as the Bay Area stuff. And salaries and all, I believe, should be commensurate with what it costs to live in a particular area. So my understanding is that we are going to soon begin a salary assessment. I don't know the official term for that, but I just want to reassure you that we will evaluate salaries within the agency to see how they set within other comparable agencies so that your answers can be addressed. At the same time, I'm not willing to look the other way and, as they use the term, kick the can down the road when it comes to our economic solvency. There were a couple of comments about the grants, in particular, the free money that is usually targeted to, or at least those grants are more easily available in disadvantaged communities, which again is pretty much all the constituents that I speak for. And the thing that hit me hardest was we have over a $4 million project in the West Point, Wilseyville area that we stand to lose. That is free money with zero payback. Now, it doesn't mean that it comes without strings, but that's a huge project, and that's just one of many down the road. And my understanding was that we brought $14 million over the recent history of free money into West Point now. We stand to lose that because we don't have the financial solvency to manage that regional wastewater facility if the state were to give us the money to build it. It's one thing to build it, it's another one to be able to maintain it. And unfortunately, because of the geography of where the people are living and where the needs are throughout this entire county, which is our service area, it's a real challenge. And the answer is really increased growth, and I've heard that. But if we're all willing to say, sure, I'll accept more traffic, I'll accept more challenges of increasing a threefold, fourfold, tenfold the population in this county in CCWD's service area. Yeah, everybody's rates, I can guarantee, will drop if we double or triple a population within the service area that currently has infrastructure. But I'm not sure that we're all willing to do that. It certainly hasn't been the character of Calaveras County residents in the past. So thank you for your time. I am not willing to kick the can down the road, and I'm going to support the rate increase for those reasons. Thank you.
I'm not following that.
There were parts of that I didn't hear. Could you, in the
Could
future,
you repeat some of that?
could you
Chuck?
speak up a little more?
Who needs a microphone?
Yeah, yours is even turned off.
Yeah, his, I noticed that. Russ or Bertha, any,
Well, I'm going to,
Oh, you're gonna let me
yeah,
jump in?
to the vice president.
Oh, gee. I'm another person who feels like it's my responsibility to not kick the can down the road. It's an overly used phrase, but in this case, it's very appropriate. I remember the town hall meeting in Copperopolis where there was a lady who, like many people here today, she was concerned about the rates and how unjustifiable it was that we were going to raise the rates here to make it very difficult for her. And then she took a breath and she said, for instance, if you had raised the rates 5 years ago, you wouldn't even have to do this. And I thought, well, that's an odd thing to say, that we did kick the can down the road, I guess, a little bit, but she wanted the rates to be raised 5 years ago and not now. I've only been on the board for less than a year and a half now, and I've come to respect the professionalism of our staff. We have Sean Korn, who I'm certain has superior abilities to advise us in this realm. It's beyond my pay grade to know as much about these issues as Sean does, so I've got to trust him. I've got to trust the other board members who have been here longer than I have. They raised no objections to the reality of the figures that we were presented with. So as unfortunate as it may be, I don't see how I can raise my hand and say I'm not in favor of this, because I'm a very practical person. I think that we need to raise the rates to comply with the state law that says that we have to have revenues that match our expenditures. Now, somebody, there was one gentleman that said that we should consider lowering our expenditures and cited as an example the lobbyists, that we should quit paying the lobbyists for a couple of years, and that would put a lot of money back on the revenue, or the equivalent of not spending money, so we'd have more money so we could reduce the impact of the rate increase. But I'm here to tell you that I have seen the performance of the lobbyists that we have in Washington. I have seen that the money that we have spent with her firm has come back, what is it, Jeff, 10 to 1 or more than that?
Well, it's more than just money, but it's actually, we're working with her to secure the Warren Act contract, which would give us 100,000 acre feet of storage of water rights that we own right now that just passes through the county. We're trying to hold that and then use it with, Strategic Management Groundwater Act and things like that, and people will pay us for that. It's not always just about getting a return on money. It's about making sure the laws that'll affect the rates and our water rights, that we're having a say in that, and we do an excellent job in doing those things.
So you agree with me that the money we spend with her is more than justified?
It's also probably I've got some numbers here, but I think we're paying under $50,000 a year. I believe that's probably like in the neighborhood of 0.0004 of our budget.
And as I understand,
for her services in particular, no, it's far below that.
40,000 then, huh?
Yeah, it's approximately 50,000.
But it's still
just
3
under 50.
points up next to the decimal point. It's a very, very small point of our budget.
Okay. People who they read about the rate increase and they automatically conclude that there's got to be something wrong with this. When I lived in San Jose, I paid a lot less than that. My children who live in San Jose, they pay a lot less than that, or over in Amador County. That it's imperative that we not compare apples and oranges. We have to look at our situation and nothing other. We have to look at the specific numbers that we're dealing with. The suggestion that we're paying too much for our people, I don't agree with that at all. I personally want the highest qualified person that we can find to operate the water treatment plant, so that when I turn my water on in Copperopolis, that I can be assured that there's no danger involved in drinking the water. And I don't want any less for any ratepayer in Copperopolis or Angels Camp or any place in the county where this district is responsible for the water quality. And when we attend meetings in Sacramento or in other places where we get a good deal of education, and it's a constant refrain about what the state mandates, the unfunded mandates, are doing to us. We have to pay far more money to comply with the new regulations than we did in the past. So that's kind of a no-brainer, which is also a bad, overly used phrase. Sorry. Mrs. Rambo, you were one of the people, you and and your friend Judy Peck talked about you felt like that you didn't get the proper responses or were treated perhaps disrespectfully.
Did over a half dozen calls to the girls here in the office, and we'll forward them to the correct people, and they never knew who the correct people were all the time.
Well,
So I trusted them.
I-
Like you said, they're well-qualified employees.
But what I observed in a meeting we had here the other day, your name came up as a person who had been in a couple of times and met with staff, and they were.
Rebecca Hitchcock.
Okay, okay, well,
Joe Metzger was kind enough to come, but he wanted a small gathering. It wasn't a big meeting. This was prior to the Vets Hall Memorial meeting for the community in Valley Springs.
Well-
And he only wanted 3-4 people. When I was telling him it might be a half a dozen or more, he got excited and said, oh, no, that's too many people. So we kept it small.
well,
We had common ground.
I have known Mr. Metzger since he was 12 years old, and he's one of the people in this county that I'm most proud of his dedication to duty and his expertise and his willingness to go out of his way. I've seen it time and time and time again. So, I mean, you're telling me about somebody that I don't even know. But I don't want to, let's not get into back and forth here. But,
Okay, this is Mrs. Rambo, thank you.
okay. Jeff, you said that the water storage was covered in the WARN Act, but isn't the WIN Act, W-I-I-N?
It's the WIN Act, but the Warren Act is the vehicle by which we could have a contract with reclamation to store water. Yeah.
Okay, well,
The WIN Act is the pathway to hopefully ultimately get to a Warren Act contract.
Okay, well, sorry about my misunderstanding. But anyway, that's all of my comments. I just think that if some of the people who have the most strident objections had been here for the last year during these seemingly unending discussions about what are we going to do about this? How are we going to make people understand that this is necessary? We often have meetings here where we're discussing very, very important issues, and the room has no one in it. It's really quite remarkable how we don't seem to have people that want to come and participate until the last minute. But I am in very much support of the action that we have to take. That's all.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, and I thank all of you who are still present, listening to the rest of the meeting going on. I'm Bertha Underhill, as my name tag says, and I've been with CCWD since 2001, and Jeff alluded to the old timers, Jeff Myers.
I don't call myself an old timer.
Jeff Davidson and I, because in my experience, I have gone through 3 rate increases. I was back in 2007, and then I came back on the board for the one that hit you, and I know how it hit you in 2012, was it?
13.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to say something about that rate increase that was enacted back in 2013. That was in 2 years, that was a 40% rate increase. And I know it hit you hard. We saw you here in the boardroom. We saw you out in the field. You could have strung us up, but we did it, and that was what we had to live with. So that if you think about that 40% increase, that equated to an 8% increase for the last 5 years. Okay, so that's basically what you've been living under. And so now here we're coming again with another rate increase, but it's half of what it was. And so we hear you, we know the circumstances you're in, the fixed incomes, the retirements. Nothing is going up except your water rate, your PG&E, your telephone, your cable, your food. And so it's a matter of doing business. And as I say, I've been here in CCWD for 3 rate increases, and we don't want to do this. We don't want to do this, but we have to. It's a cost of doing business. We talk about giving us, what does our mission statement say? We're cost conscious, we have reliable service, and a lot of you I hear say we're paying too much. We're giving you quality of life, because that's what we're here for. That's why we're here in Calaveras County. We're going through all these trials and tribulations every day, but we're here because we love it. And I'm here because I love sitting on the board. Being with my fellow directors is wonderful, and it's, satisfying to me, and I'm proud to serve you. And I'm going to be the 3rd person, or the 3rd director, to vote for the rate increase.
Director Davis.
Well, now that Foghorn Leghorn left, we can. I just want to, say, when I came to the board, it has been a long time. Back then, everybody on the board was an old timer. Now it's changed a little bit, but I do remember it well. I came on as a concerned citizen. I was certainly disgruntled, probably more so than anybody in the room here today, and I was very cautious and suspicious of the staff at that time. Certainly, attorneys and the things that we were paying a lot of. We've eliminated all that nonsense with regards to attorneys' fees and frivolous lawsuits, and I'm actually very proud of that work that we've done over the years. It was a different board 20 years ago, and quite frankly, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when we had North Fork cash, that should have been reinvested into the district infrastructure. One of the things is, nobody wants to raise your rates. Certainly nobody up here wants to do this. And that's the case with a lot of the small boards, where if you actually go into their finances, I'm sure you'll find they're not putting any money into infrastructure, and it's because they can't afford to put money into infrastructure because they can't raise rates. They won't do it. And only when a catastrophe happens, a break, will they fix something. Well, that's no way to run a business. Preventive maintenance, get the longest life out of your facilities, have the best quality staff. That's the right way to run a business. That's the cheapest way to run it. And sometimes it does cost money. Well, it always costs money to do that. The first time a rate increase came across where I had a vote on it was 2001. I voted no. 2007, I voted no again. In 2013, 14, whenever it was, I get that confused. I also rejected staff's proposal and made a motion to reduce their overall program by about 30%. I'm not ashamed that I voted to, or I got the board to reduce that vote, because it was just a short year, a couple short years later, where this board actually voted to eliminate the 4th year of that increase. That went unnoticed by everybody. It's funny. We have an $18 million budget. Who was here for any of the budget hearings? There's one person. And honestly, that frustrates this board. And the media didn't raise their hand either. And we've been thankful that the media has finally started to show back up, but it's been probably 3 years where we did not have a voice in the local media. There was no watchdog here. There was nobody to even talk about the accomplishments, which is frustrating for staff and for the board. When we're building millions of dollars worth of infrastructure, tens of millions of dollars of infrastructure, and many of it with tens of $millions of grants, and it all goes unnoticed. The only time we get noticed is when this occurs, and it's very frustrating. This staff, I have a great deal of faith in. Previous staffs, I didn't have the faith in, so I didn't support their recommendations. I think we all know deep in our heart that our issue is more about an economy of scale. You know, in La Cantera area, we've got the same requirements that they do in the city of Stockton, and we have, you know, what, 1,100 ratepayers. You know, it doesn't take a genius to do that math and realize it's going to cost more. I just saw a report where the city of Oakland just spent $400 million on a new sewer treatment facility, and yet they're paying $75 per month in the city of Oakland, which, how many do they have? 1 million people? And 250,000 gallons of sewage ran down the street. You know, things don't break here. I mean, things break, but we're doing everything we can to do preventive maintenance to make sure that they don't break. We are providing a reliable system. And yes, it is going to cost more to live here, just like it costs more to shop at Marvell grocery store. You know, it's the exact same thing. It just is. You know, we had the state come several years ago and mandate that we ask you to use less water. Okay, imagine that at your own business if the state would come in and say, hey, we want you to reduce your sales by 25%. In addition to that, we're going to start to increase all of our fees because our budget is having problems as well. That's occurred. So if you're angry, let's take our anger to those people who regulate us. Please take it the next step. I mean, for the 20 people that showed up here today, I applaud you for coming and trying to educate yourself on what this district does. And I guarantee you have only scratched the surface. You know, I mean, it's funny. I've seen many board members come, and they all had grand ideas, and then they actually learn all of the things that we have to do, and they become a completely different person because it's education. If you're gonna complain, do it on an educated basis. Trust me, we're not perfect. I realize that. I'm definitely not perfect. The other thing that people need to recognize is, you know, how many miles of pipe per capita do we have? I don't know that number, but I know there's 120 miles of pipe in the Ginny Lind water system. 120 miles of pipe. I guarantee you there's probably not 120 miles of pipe in the city of Stockton. You know, so you can imagine and it was all installed by Boise Cascade in the 60s. And so we're taking steps and we're making plans to improve that system. And we, thankfully, because of the past board's action, we have the money to do that. Another thing that I just think, you know, just as an example of what's going on in our county, you know, recently I build metal buildings for a living. I'm not going to, you know, I've got everybody's attention. Usually I give out my phone number when I do that. But my fees from December to January changed for building, these are just small buildings, but it went from 44 cents per square foot, this is Calaveras County government, it went to 44 cents per square foot to $1.38 per square foot. That's a 310% increase on my permit fees. You didn't have a chance to protest that. I didn't even know about it until I went and paid and picked up a permit. You know, costs go up, you know. I think the 218 process is a good process because it does allow the public to participate in it. And I want to commend staff greatly for the outreach. I think the job that everybody did was really terrific. And the people that wanted to listen and educate themselves had every opportunity to do so. So I'm proud of that. Just a couple things in wrapping up. I think a couple things that didn't come up, and I'm surprised. Usually we get grief for this building, for moving out of the old admin building. And I just kind of want to put that to bed. First of all, I believe our debt service on this is $75,000 per year. As a portion of our $18 million budget, that's 0.004 of our budget. The old admin building was in such disrepair. Every bathroom in that building had a 2-foot door. Okay, obviously, if you know anything about ADA requirements, you realize that that's not in compliance. The parking lot had too great of a grade to comply with ADA standards. The building was too small. There's asbestos. We actually have reports that I'm sure we can put online, if they're not already online, that says what a terrible building that was, plus it was too small. And it needed to have an elevator in the center of it because it's a 3-story building. So we built this facility for $180 a square foot, which you can't get a contractor to build a single-family residence for that price. So I'm not the least bit ashamed of moving over to this building. This will last 60 years. You know, it was the right move to make. We've tried to sell that building for over 3 years. Nobody would take it, you know, because we also have to do the disclosure. We have to be honest about things. So, I mean, I could go on for 2 hours about the accomplishments of the district, you know. The bottom line is, I don't want to raise your rates. I don't want to do it. I'm going to pay them. My friends are going to pay them. I probably have less friends now, but the reality is, our staff, I trust them, I believe them, and I hope that over time you will all get more educated with what we have to do here and support the district. So with that, I'll make a motion, or you want to probably speak.
Yeah.
Your conscience is clear now.
Hold on.
Yeah, no,
Okay, before we take any action, Jeff, you did have a couple comments, and then I do have some closing comments I would like to make, and then we'll entertain an action.
Yes, thank you, President Reiterman. What I'd like to bring your attention to, because you were just about to make a motion, Director Davidson, is the ordinance 2018-1, I should say. This is the ordinance that we are requesting you adopt. It will replace any existing rate structure that we have at this particular time. And it the attachment, which is Exhibit 1, outlines the rate schedule for water-based rates, bi-monthly water-based rates, bi-monthly water tiered and consumptive rate charges for residential, for non-residential, for irrigation landscape. That's all in Table 1 and Table 2. Table 3 addresses the bi-monthly water shortage rate charges, and that's all under Schedule A. Schedule B addresses the bi-monthly wastewater rate charges for residential under Table 1, non-residential under Table 2, and Schedule 3 is the agricultural water rates, and that's in Table 1. And these are the rates that you will be adopting today under the ordinance, 2018-01. And it is our recommendation that you approve those rates, which will become effective for all but agricultural on July 16th of this year, which is the beginning of the billing period. We bill from the 16th through the 15th of the following month, and agricultural rates will become effective January 1 of next year. Thank you.
Wait, hang tight. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jeff, I have just an internal question here. At our last meeting, we had a gentleman come forward and ask us to reconsider the charges for a 1-inch meter versus a 5/8 meter. If we adopt this ordinance the way it's printed here, how much flexibility do we have if we chose to re-examine what the impact of the fire sprinkler systems might be and the associated rate structures, a specific for a 1-inch versus a 5/8? Do we have flexibility on that?
We have the flexibility to review it and make recommendations, but, and Dave, please correct me if I'm wrong, the rate structure in the ordinance that you say is specifically shows what it is for a 5/8, 3/4, and a 1. We would have to come back and amend the ordinance. Is that correct, Dave?
Yes, that's correct. Any amendment of the ordinance would require further board action.
Would it require public hearing?
If the structure of the rate tiers that were set out changed, yes, it would.
Public hearing to the same level as a 218 process?
Depending on the specific change to the tier, yes. If there was a way to analyze that within the existing tier structure, depending on what that impact was and the proportionality between the charge or the fee and the benefit to the property, then that'd be something we'd want to work with our consultant on to see if it would fit within the existing tier. So in short, it depends on the actual substantive nature of that change to the tier structure.
So we would work hard to make sure that whatever change we did make, if we're gonna allow 1-inch meters to up to a single-family home, we would make sure that we craft it in a way that we don't have to bring it back through a Prop 218.
That would be the ideal, presuming that that benefit that was service to that property was proportionate with the fee actually charged.
And that's, following up, that would be something that we would have to study, and we'd have to work with HDR, again, on proportionality.
Well, the argument is that whether a brand-new home has a 5/8, is forced to put a 5/8 in, or a 1-inch to comply with the new sprinkler systems that are being required, there will not be any increased flow to that house unless there is a catastrophic fire. So it really doesn't affect the consumption or anything. So.
We'll get all that stuff worked out.
Okay, great.
Don't worry.
I won't worry anymore.
Okay. All right, thank you, Jeff. Really
Thank you.
appreciate your comments. Okay, I have a few final comments, and then we're going to be entertaining an action from the board. I do also want to point out that we do have 18 separate water and wastewater facilities. Each one of those is operated by qualified, licensed operators, and they're continually required, further education. This is something that is not different. I mean, it is way different than someone like Stockton or Merced or Modesto. They have one wastewater facility, one water facility, and much, much less pipe per customer. They also have 10, 20, 30 times more customers that we have to divide those bills amongst. So with our 18 separate water and wastewater facilities, I think it's reasonable to assume that the costs are going to be a little bit higher, just like the quality of life is a little bit higher to live in the foothills. We have worked for the past several years reducing expenses and have done a great job. And I do want to commend staff, Patty, Jeff, General Manager Dave Egerton for looking at all these expenses. We've kind of tied the hands of our staff 5 years ago when we did our rate increase. Nothing new, no new money went to operations and maintenance. None, zero. All new money at that point in time went to capital improvement projects, which we've been, busting through with new projects all the way across the county. And there's more and more projects that are on the list. Geez, I think there's $40 million worth of projects that we're still waiting to get to, and they're on a long list. That's part of our capital improvement program, which our directors here and I have touched on, and I'm very proud of that program, and that we put it together, and that we're maintaining with it, and that we're able to get to this point 5 years later without having to dip in with cutting expenses. We've been able to get here. The last thing that this board wants to do, and I do appreciate all my board members and how respectful, and I do appreciate staff today as well as the public in being respectful through this meeting. This is a tough thing to do. None of us want to raise rates. That's not a happy time. It's not. It does attract attention. There's no way that's what we want to do. But I also do think that it is necessary at this time. And for the outreach that we've done, I do want to thank Joel and Stacy and Rebecca and the rest of the staff in putting this together. We got a great staff. They work hard. They are paid well. They don't leave. They stay here and continue working. They are represented by a union, which does put a little bit of pressure on us when it does come time to negotiate those new labor rates. As was mentioned by one of my fellow board members earlier today, we are doing a study right now and studying all adjacent and familiar utilities to CCWD, just to make sure that we are on task and on board, and we got the right numbers for our we are paying the right salaries across the board. That's pretty much all I have to say, and I would like to point out that this is an action item, that we are looking for a motion at this point.
We decided to let one of the junior members of the board make the motion.
Is that right?
Mr. President, before we get to the motion, I would just ask that the motion also include direction regarding the creation of the framework for rate assistance program? I've got language here that we can, if we can incorporate this to it, I'll go ahead and read that. It says, direct staff to work with our customers and the board to develop the framework for a rate assistance program for consideration of adoption by the board this calendar year.
Okay. I was going to mention that a little bit later. It was on my list here, but that would be. We talked about this a couple times during our meeting here today. It's about a customer assistance program. A customer assistance program that could be created with, under the 218 process, you cannot use rate money to subsidize other people. You cannot use rates that come to the district. That you have to use another source of income. Currently, we do have other sources of income that we've alluded to, hydro, cell tower rates. We also have property tax rates. These are not tied to income, not the revenues. They're not tied to the rates. So it does allow us. What we're looking for is new income to the district, and we have been looking for alternative sources of revenue. The storage in Maloney's will provide that at some point if the WIN Act and the Warren Act. But right now we're asking it to be looked at, and Dave Egerton, our general manager, has asked us to include that in a motion if we.
Yeah, and actually, Mr. President, I want to be clear that that's not actually an action, so it's probably inappropriate to include within the motion for adoption of the ordinance. But just it maybe the subsequent action or not action, the subsequent message from the board could be to communicate that it's a direction for us to get to work on this, as I explained, and we'll make that part of the record of this meeting, so that's our charge.
What I would suggest is that we make it actually a board item in the future, very near future, and take action to address and adopt that if possible.
Yeah,
I think that's maybe a more clear way to.
That's why I said that for consideration of adoption this calendar year was,
And we can, if we feel comfortable as a board, instead of that, we can give directions to take a look at it and have it on a future agenda item.
I think it's clear.
Yeah, it is clear. We've made it clear. We've talked about it several times.
All we're doing is confusing people about what we're doing here. Let's stick to the focus on what we're doing.
Can I make a motion?
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion adopting ordinance 2018-01, approving the district's proposed water and wastewater rate plan.
And again, that would include the emergency shortfall water situation.
Everything
That's in there.
Everything
That's in there.
included.
Yes.
Everything included in Exhibit 1.
I'll second that motion.
We have some discussion, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
We've had our discussion.
So, did I understand that he withdrew that suggestion?
Yes.
It's not, that's,
Mr. President, to be clear, one more time, I created the confusion by mentioning it at the time that you were considering taking action. It is strictly direction, which has already been communicated. This is no action of the board for us to come back to bring to the board a proposal for the framework for rate assistance program.
so that is not part of the motion at this time, but it is something that we'll discuss sometime.
It'll be noted in the minutes that was direction communicated by the board, but it was not an action.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Any further discussion at the board level?
Can I say something? Do you have something like CARE, like PG? I'm sorry.
We can talk about it after the meeting if you like.
Yeah, thank you. And before we take a vote, just for a proceeding, we've already had public comment on this item to the nth degree, I'm pretty sure.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So, no further discussion at the board level. Rebecca, will you take roll?
Director Strange?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Thomas?
Yes.
Director Underhill?
Yes.
President Radden?
Yes. Okay, so again, to kind of recap where we're at, the rates have been adopted. The new water and wastewater rates will go into effect July 16th, 2018. The new agricultural rates will go into effect January 1st, 2019. And just to make it clear, the The CARE program that you just asked a question about is what we're calling a customer assistance program, and that's what we'll be discussing in a future agenda item. We've given direction to staff to look into different ways of providing that kind of assistance and service to members of our community and ratepayers. And just as one other thing, as these rates go up, we do, on our website, we have created a new water rate calculator. It's on our website. It's a new tool. You can look at and see what your rates are going to look like in 2019, 2022, just by going to the website and plugging in the information. From what I understand, it's very user-friendly and does allow any ratepayer to look at that for planning and budgeting purposes. With that, go on to item 4 on our agenda is next board meetings. We'll be meeting in this room Wednesday, June 13th at 1 p.m., our regular board meeting. And then again on Tuesday, June 19th, we have a budget workshop here at 1 p.m. On Wednesday, June 27th, we have a regular board meeting where we'll be discussing budget adoption, and that's also at 1 p.m. With that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Well, that wasn't too bad. Congratulations. We're the new. Good job. Is this the new ones on? The new ones on.
The junior members.
The new ones on the board. Well, I'll go out and see if my tires are okay.